Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freak.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is...
Murder Coaster.
Today, ladies and gentlemen, we cover a crime so horrifically horrible and brutal and committed by such a young offender, a boy only 14 years old, that many believed it had to have been of supernatural means. And in fact, this case would represent the peak of the Satanic Panic fever dream that gripped the United States in the 1980s and would be cited by many, including talk show host Geraldo Rivera, as definitive proof of demonic possession. And while belief that demons and devils are actively at work committing horrible crimes has mostly faded from modern society, to this very day, this case is bandied about as one of otherworldly and demonically sinister origins. Ladies and gentlemen, we present to you the story of Tommy Sullivan Jr. and the Satanic Panic.
Let's begin. Prologue. Pandemonium on White Rock Boulevard. Jefferson Township, New Jersey is known as the, quote, year-round recreational capital of New Jersey, end quote. It encompasses 44 square miles of forests, lakes, and nature preserves. It has always been known as a place where everyone left their doors unlocked, and neighbors didn't knock, but strolled right in. Some saying it was such a seemingly safe and protected place, doors weren't kept unlocked, but wide open. But all of that would change on the night of Saturday, January 9th, 1988, with the sound of a smoke detector.
The holiday season had just ended. It was a new year, and things were returning to normal in the suburb of White Rock Boulevard, snow blanketing the sleepy street, when Thomas Sullivan Sr. awoke to the sound of his smoke detector and stumbled out of bed, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and shuffled into the living room where he was greeted with smoke and flames.
Squinting into the smoke, it appeared the sofa and rug were on fire, and his first thoughts were of his wife and children. He had to get them out of the house, so he ran back into his bedroom to awaken his wife, Betty Ann, but she's mysteriously not there. He then sprints to his 14-year-old son Tommy Jr.'s room, but he's not there either.
In a panic, Thomas Sr. decides to bolt to the neighbor's house, who was having a party, and enlist help to put out the fire and search for his missing family members.
As Thomas Sr. ran from the smoke-filled house out into the snowy night, he spied something very odd. His car, running, no one inside, was crashed into a snowbank across the street.
He begins pounding on the door of his neighbors, the Eastmans, and this itself sets off alarm bells, as no one knocked in this little town. They always just walked right in.
Inside the house, there was a party going on, and the Kennedy boys from down the street were there. Bobby, Stuart, and Michael, all in their early 20s.
The Kennedy boys were seen as guardians of the neighborhood, stalwart protectors that folks came to rely on in times of trouble.
So when Thomas Sr. shouted, "Help! My house is on fire and I can't find my family," the Kennedy boys shot up and raced to the house with Thomas.
Stuart and Bobby immediately began to work at quelling the fire, while Michael and Thomas Sr. began to search for the rest of the family.
The fire proved to be no big thing, more smoke than anything else. As they stamped it out, they noticed something strange. The fire had been started with books and papers, burned bits of which now began to drift through the air, and the Kennedy brothers noticed the books had been placed in a perfect circle on the living room floor. And the books were all about black magic and the occult. There was a satanic Bible there, and what looked like a school book report on Satanism.
Thomas and Stuart meanwhile locate the youngest boy, Brian, in his bedroom. How he was sleeping through all this pandemonium and why Thomas Sr. didn't go to him in the beginning is a mystery to me. But, as we'll see, this case is filled with strangeness, brimming with it, in fact.
Little Brian, only 8 years old, tells them that he'd seen his brother Tommy Jr. earlier that night in the bathroom, washing blood from his hands. He'd told Brian that he'd cut himself, and Mommy was going to drive him to the hospital to get some stitches, that it was no big deal and to go back to bed, which little Brian did.
The Kennedy brothers breathed a sigh of relief. Betty Ann and Tommy must be at the hospital. But Thomas Sr. says no, that can't be, because both cars are still there, though one is running and smashed into the side of a snowbank.
So they decide to investigate the one place they hadn't searched yet, the basement.
As they descended the stairs, suddenly Michael let out a horrible screech and bolted back up through the door, leaping across the snow-covered front yard.
There in the basement, by the laundry room, was Betty Ann Sullivan, devoted wife and mother of 2, homemaker, lying face up in a puddle of blood. The back of her head had been caved in. She'd been stabbed 36 times, her throat slashed, her face mutilated, her eyes torn from her head.
The police are quickly called, and at 10:28 is put out over the police radio.
In New Jersey, a 1028 means murder.
The closest cop was one Officer Bart McConnelly, who came racing to the scene in disbelief. A 1028 in Jefferson Township? It was unheard of. There were no murders in Jefferson Township. It just didn't happen. And when he gets to the scene, this is unbelievable. This cop is too scared to go into the house alone.
Oh boy. Apparently, Officer McConnelly knew Stuart Kennedy, who, as we said, had the reputation as the neighborhood protector. So Officer McConnelly pleads with Stuart to come into the house and search it with him.
Stuart is incredulous, saying, "You're the one with a badge and a gun." Officer McConnelly says, "Yes, but you were always the one that led the fights when we were kids. You're the brave one, the tough one. Please, please come inside with me."
It's wild. So reluctantly, Stuart comes with Officer McConnelly and they begin to creep around the house together. McConnelly in the lead with his pistol drawn, Stuart Kennedy behind.
At one point, they come to a suspicious closet, and Officer McConnelly throws the closet door open and, thinking he sees something lurking in the shadows, he leaps away, leaving Stuart standing there, unarmed, to face whatever lurks within.
And it was nothing. Nothing at all. Officer McConnelly was apparently just a coward and literally scared of his own shadow. But by this point, Stuart had had enough and said, "Fuck this, I'm out of here."
Thankfully, other officers were now arriving and securing the scene.
Investigators come to believe that a perpetrator must have come into the house, which was most likely unlocked as everyone bragged about not locking their doors, killed Betty Ann, and kidnapped Tommy Jr. It was the only thing that made any sense. Unless the father had done it, but he had no blood on him, and he seemed genuinely distraught and concerned. Though over the years, suspicion of Thomas Sr. would never entirely go away.
But everyone agreed they needed to find Tommy Jr. That was the priority, and police searched through the night, not realizing he was only 100 feet away the entire time.
Early the next morning, Sunday, January 10th, 1988, the neighbor, Mr. Eastman, awoke, frazzled and shocked by the mayhem from the night before. He went to his kitchen, made a cup of coffee, and sipped it as he stared blankly out the window and into his snow-blanketed backyard, a small flock of sparrows darting about the bird feeder, when he noticed something odd. Over by his woodpile was a dark circle in the snow, and sitting awkwardly in the middle of it was a strange, misaligned figure.
He slipped on his boots and stepped outside, then stopped and gasped. What he saw was too horrible to be real, but there it was, literally staring back at him, the corpse of Tommy Sullivan Jr.
Tommy sat with his back against the woodpile, a bloody Boy Scout knife cradled in his right hand. His left wrist had been sliced so deeply his hand was hanging flipped back, the tendons and muscles all severed.
But worst of all was his throat. It had been cut so deeply as to nearly decapitate him, severing the carotid arteries, the windpipe, the muscles, all the way down to the spinal column. And now his head hung dementedly to the side like a broken doll.
So much blood had leaked from his body so as to form a dark circle about him, stretching out 10 feet.
It was quickly noted by investigators that there was only one set of tracks in the snow leading to the woodpile. Tommy's, and Tommy's alone. Therefore, the wounds had to be self-inflicted. He had to have done this to himself.
This was further confirmed when a bizarre suicide note was discovered, a literal contract between Tommy and the greatest demon of hell, saying,
I will tempt as many people as possible to do evil and follow you. I will kill many Christian followers who are serious in their beliefs.
Then there was a section that was crossed out that read,
I will not kill my family until I live for years from this very day, as will be done to avoid any suspicion of neighbors from becoming suspicious, not out of any love for them.
Beside this crossed out section were the words,
I have already killed my family.
Then the contract reads,
I will tempt all teenagers on earth to have sex, have incest, do drugs, and worship you. I believe that evil will once again rise and conquer the love of God. If this pact is to your approval, sign below.
And Tommy had signed it, apparently, in order to reign in hell.
Many were so shocked by the intensity of the wounds Tommy had inflicted on himself as to believe they were of a supernatural origin. And even the coroner would wonder how a 14-year-old boy was able to first slash his wrist so badly he cut the tendons and his hand dangled there, then jam the knife into his neck with such force that it reached the spine and then hack across, nearly decapitating himself.
To many, it simply had to be the result of a demonic force. It was the only thing that made sense.
Other mysterious elements of the crime led folks to believe the supernatural was involved as well, such as a mysterious smear of blood on the basement ceiling.
Many believed this blood smear had been left either by the demon who watched over the horrible murder, or by the actual body of Betty Ann Sullivan that had either been levitated by demonic power or thrown against the ceiling in a feat of strength Tommy was incapable of.
After Tommy's funeral, rumors abounded that various satanic cults were coming to dig up the body because it contained the soul of the devil. And police guarded the grave around the clock, waiting for these strange sects to converge. But they never did.
But you know who did show up? Geraldo Rivera, gathering content for his infamous television special, Exposing Satan's Underground, that catapulted the Satanic Panic to a fever pitch.
Television crew filmed Tommy's room, walls plastered with so-called heavy metal bands such as David Lee Roth, Poison, Cinderella. Honestly, bands that were barely heavy metal, more glam and hair rock, as well as a large, homemade Motley Crue poster right below a crucifix.
They filmed Tommy's drawing pad, childish drawings of devils and demons, creepy in their amateurishness and crudeness, cloaked cult members ripping apart the bodies of naked women with dialogue bubbles reading, "Come to me, Satan."
Geraldo Rivera stared into the camera and asked, how could this happen here, to a fine Catholic boy in a nice middle-class neighborhood? Heavy metal is not answer enough, but we continue to search for the answers. What made Tommy do it?
Chapter 1. The Sullivans on White Rock Boulevard.
Thomas Sr. and his wife Betty Ann settled in Jefferson Township, New Jersey, because it was a great place to raise a family. The local elementary school was down the street, and their boys, Tommy Jr. and his younger brother Brian, could walk there.
It was an all-American, wholesome lifestyle. Tommy was an altar boy and a Boy Scout. He had a paper route, delivering papers throughout the suburbs on his bicycle.
Tommy Jr. was also athletic and smart, doing very well in school. So when it was time for high school, instead of sending him to the local public school, Jefferson High, his parents instead sent him to Pope John Catholic High School in the Sparta Township, the fancier and richer side of town.
Tommy was a wrestler, and apparently wrestling is taken very, very seriously in New Jersey. Kids become obsessed, waking up before dawn to run 5 miles, eating a strict and regimented diet, no junk food or candy, watching and recording every calorie. They go through brutal strength conditioning and are constantly drilled to never give up, find that inner strength, and ignore pain.
High school wrestlers are trained to become literal warriors. Some of the slogans wrestling coaches adorn gymnasiums with are "Pin to dominate," "Fight for glory," "No pain, pin gain," and, forebodingly, "Unleash the beast."
Many New Jersey high school wrestlers hope to get college scholarships. It is seen not only as a sport, but as a means of finding higher education, a lifestyle, and a culture that Tommy was quite enmeshed in.
You know, everything I know about wrestling comes from John Irving, one of my favorite writers. You ever read The World According to Garp?
I have not, actually. And I know practically nothing about wrestling.
You have to read it. It's great. It's one of the best books ever written. Wrestling and bears are what John Irving always talks about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It is interesting to note that the National Library of Medicine states, quote, "Due to the unique nature and culture of the sport, wrestlers may be more likely to attribute concussions or closed head injury symptoms to normal training-related fatigue, which can lead to underreporting or delayed diagnosis." End quote. They furthermore state that traumatic brain injury often leads to cognitive and personality issues that might increase risk of crime. And in a study, it was found that head injury in young adulthood was associated with severe risk of violence.
Yeah, mounting scientific evidence shows that traumatic brain injury, even a mild one that doesn't cause loss of consciousness, can lead to aggression or violent behavior. And as anyone who listens to this show or studies true crime knows, the vast majority of serial killers have suffered traumatic brain injuries at some point in their early lives.
Research in the American Journal of Public Health also shows that head injuries increase the risk of suicide. Findings in a 2009 study reveal that self-harm is much more prevalent in those with a prior head injury. That's super interesting. I had never heard that one before.
Yeah, and there are links to these articles in the show notes. And being on the Pope John High School wrestling team also caused a social rift for Tommy as well. The wrestling team for Jefferson High, the local public high school, was the Falcons, and there was a fierce rivalry between them and the Pope John Catholic High School's wrestling team, the Lions.
Tommy lived among the Jefferson High wrestlers, not in neighboring Sparta, where most of the rich kids who went to Pope John High lived. So, as has been noted, quote,
"In a town full of falcons, Tommy was a lion."
And there was another thing that set Tommy apart from the good, God-fearing folks of Jefferson Township. He played Dungeons and Dragons. Dun, dun, dun!
Horror of horrors. In 1985, John Quigley of the Lakeview Full Gospel Fellowship spoke for many opponents of the role-playing game when he claimed, "Dungeons and Dragons is an occult tool that opens up young people to influence or possession by demons."
An actual organization formed in the early 80s to combat the game called BADD, B-A-D-D, or Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, described D&D as a, quote, fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex, perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic-type rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism, sadism, desecration, demon summoning, necromantics, divination, and other teachings. End quote.
They honestly make it sound quite fun.
Yeah.
My son was president of his high school Dungeons and Dragons club, and he actually teaches the game at the local elementary school. He gets paid quite well to do it, too. He's a dungeon master to huge, epic local games, and the only thing it's done to him is make him much more nerdy. But I think that at that time in the 1980s, being associated with something that was frowned on and being actively scapegoated did set one apart and make them an outsider. As did listening to heavy metal music, which Tommy also began to do.
But despite playing the dreaded and feared Dungeons and Dragons and listening to heavy metal, Tommy seemed a well-adjusted, normal teenager, exhibiting no warning signs of violence, no real red flags at all. That is, until Thanksgiving 1987, when a sudden and drastic change came over him, culminating in murder and suicide just 3 months later.
Many believe this ghastly change was caused by a controversial new class being taught at Pope John High, a class that many of the faculty and parents thought should not be taught.
And what was this controversial new subject that was being taught? World religion.
Yes, just being taught that other religions existed and learning about them was deemed by many as evil.
Oh, good grief. Before the Thanksgiving break, each student in this controversial new class was given a religion to write a paper on.
And Tommy received Mormonism. But apparently Tommy found it boring studying how God had given Joseph Smith the power to translate the writings of golden plates an angel had directed him to, and instead he became interested in the subject another student was assigned: Satanism.
This other student was apparently a friend of Tommy's and also on the wrestling team. In police reports, in order to protect his identity because he was a minor, he is simply referred to as Juvenile 1.
Over the years, the rumor mill in New Jersey has come to the conclusion that this student, Juvenile 1, may have been Jewish. Apparently, many students who were not Catholic studied at Pope John High, as their parents thought it offered them a better education and an easier means of getting into elite colleges. But why would they assume the student was Jewish? Because a good Catholic boy would never volunteer to write a paper on Satanism. Only a Jewish kid would do that. Which makes no sense, especially given that Tommy, who was a literal altar boy, went headlong into devil worship.
If this whole assuming only a Jewish kid would choose to study Satanism thing sounds racist, it should be noted that New Jersey, and in particular that area of New Jersey, has a long history of racism and was a hotspot for the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes, while Satanic Panic reports of devil worshippers in the woods around Jefferson Township, New Jersey abounded, there were also many, many reports of folks stumbling into backwoods meetings of the KKK as well.
Even in 2017, the KKK was active in New Jersey, recruiting, making phone calls, and passing out flyers during Black History Month reading, quote, "Love your race," end quote, and, quote, "Stop race mixing," end quote.
Ugh. In 1918, New Jersey firebrand and resident Alma White founded the anti-Semitic Pillar of Fire Church. And in 1923, the KKK founded the Pillar of Fire Church to establish the Alma White College in Somerset County, New Jersey. The college was rooted in KKK beliefs and was infamous for many pro-Ku Klux Klan materials that it published. This openly racist college operated until 1978, just 10 years before the murder.
So the New Jersey rumor mill not only comes to believe that Juvenile 1 is Jewish, but since he has an older sister, assumes that the sister must have had a Satanist boyfriend that is involved in a cult of devil worshippers.
Because of this convoluted logic, this kid who chose to write about Satanism for his high school report and had a family member in a satanic cult, again, this is all just rumor and speculation, this kid, Juvenile 1, gives Tommy a copy of Anton LaVey's The Satanic Bible and turns him on to the dreaded heavy metal music, which Tommy quickly becomes a huge fan of, decorating his room with images of David Lee Roth, Poison, and Cinderella. And we just have to say again, these are just glam bands with no satanic leanings whatsoever. He wasn't into Slayer and Wasp and King Diamond, real satanic bands. He was listening to straight up hair metal.
But studying Satanism and listening to heavy metal apparently had a huge effect on Tommy. He becomes surly and argumentative, hyper-aggressive on the mat during wrestling. During the winter tournament, he won 4 matches in a row, putting him on his way to going all the way to the top and becoming a state champion.
But then he met his match. A kid who outmaneuvered him, got his weight on him, and was set to pin him. When Tommy scrambled out, put an illegal hold on the other boy, and pulled on his arm until the boy's elbow exploded.
Tommy was kicked off the wrestling team and suspended from all school sports, further alienating him.
And then Tommy completely devoted himself to the dark arts, uncovering ancient esoteric tomes with incantations to bring demons up from the underworld, and he discovers a crumbling castle deep in the woods where satanic cult members gather for rituals, a castle once owned by a notorious pagan who held human sacrifices. And there, 14-year-old Tommy Sullivan holds his own ritual on the winter solstice, the ancient Yule holiday that celebrates the wild hunt of Odin.
Or, so we are told. But we may have to take many of these stories with a large grain of salt.
Chapter 2: Satanic Panic and the Devil Within.
The houses on the old block are glowing. The children dressed up in masks. And me, I'm not afraid of this raw vodka in my kitchen glass. I wonder what my family does tonight, in a crowd all clinging to a cross. Me, I'm not afraid of Halloween or this line that I've crossed. These monsters and spirits don't scare me much, when what I fear the most is that trickster, that bully, that stole my family, the fucking Holy Ghost. The frames in my head filled with photographs from all the lives I used to live, cluttered onto and tables and shelves I meant to clear off but never did. There's a ghost orb in every single one of them, where my face should be.
Unfortunately, there is very little information about this case out there. Much of the police reports themselves have been redacted because of Tommy being a minor. There have been no books written about it, no Lifetime television adaptations. There's not even a Wikipedia page for the crime. Besides a handful of newspaper articles and the infamous Geraldo Rivera television special, the only real and thorough source is a 10-part investigative podcast series entitled The Devil Within.
Now, let me start out by saying that The Devil Within is a very well-made podcast, and I actually enjoyed it very much. The writer and narrator, Brandon Morgan, has a wonderful voice and is a very talented writer. It's genuinely creepy and really very scary. Very professional sound quality and music. And there are lots of interviews with all kinds of folks, such as the neighbors, the police, even the current mayor, a former police officer who was on the scene. And writer Brandon Morgan grew up right there, so he knows the place and the culture. The thing that sets this podcast apart, though, is that it comes from a Christian perspective, where all of the supernatural satanic panic elements are presented as real. It appears that Brandon truly believes that demonic influence is what caused this murder. And that's fine. In fact, it's very interesting, fascinating, and everyone is entitled to their own spiritual and religious beliefs. The problem is there are no references provided. There are some very bold statements, and Brandon himself admits he used his own form of convoluted logic to come to many of the conclusions that he presents as facts.
As listeners of this show have most likely noted, we list all of our references. Every book, newspaper article, podcast, television investigation, they're all in our show notes, so you can see exactly where we get our information. Unfortunately, there are no references in the podcast The Devil Within, so we were unable to corroborate much of it.
And the internet is just filled with folks complaining about this. On Reddit, there are long threads saying the podcast The Devil Within is religiously biased to the point of being fiction. Folks writing,
"This is a bad piece of fictional storytelling trying to pass itself off as true crime. It's not. It's irresponsible bunk."
And can we just stick to the facts and not force our own religious views on each other? If I wanted to listen to a Christian podcast, I would have looked for that from the start. Don't disguise your podcast as true crime and then force feed us Christianity as fact.
Reviewers say, "OMG, you actually believe in the Satanic Panic? I was a teenager living in a small town when this stupidity started and was labeled a Satanist because I wore black and listened to heavy metal. Especially by my stepmother's church, when she was the evil one that beat me and her own kids daily. What a joke."
And we present you with this information not in judgment, for as we said, it is a very well-made podcast, extremely well-written. Brandon has a wonderful and lulling voice, and there are great interviews with former police officer, neighbors, as well as folklore scholars. But we want to be upfront with you as well, for there is a lot that is presented as fact that we simply could not confirm.
And just to be clear, we here at Murder Coaster don't claim to be investigative journalists. We admit we may occasionally get things wrong, and we welcome listeners to correct us if we do. We are just storytellers.
So all of that being said, New Jersey itself has a long history of the supernatural and strange, and over the years, the case of Tommy Sullivan has become enmeshed within it and is now part of the lore and legends, which all seem to interconnect. So let's take a look at how the story of Tommy Sullivan has become part of the lore of the land.
Chapter 3. Weird New Jersey.
According to Brandon Morgan, 14-year-old Tommy Sullivan discovered a cult of devil worshippers that held rituals in a crumbling pagan castle in the forest along Clinton Road.
Clinton Road is a rural 10-mile stretch of road off the Hamburg Turnpike that has a long history of being cursed and haunted. Most of the legends are silly and childish, like a hellhound named Wolfie, and a ghost boy that will appear on a bridge if you put a quarter on it at midnight. Fun stuff.
But chillingly, many have said they've stumbled across Ku Klux Klan meetings in this dark stretch of forest. And serial killer and hitman for the mob, Richard Kalinsky, aka the Iceman, once dumped a body there. So these real-life horrors of violent racists and serial killers lend an air of truth to all the whispers of ghosts and demons.
And the road is also home to the Cross Castle.
Yes, the Cross Castle. In 1905, the incredibly wealthy English-born banker Richard James Cross bought 365 acres of wooded glens and farmland with a pristine 77-acre pond in the middle of it in northern New Jersey near the New York border. There he built a massive stone Tudor summer home resembling a castle for his wife and 3 children.
Richard Cross spent over $1.5 million on the construction of the stone house that would later become known as Cross's Castle, which would be over $40 million in today's money.
After Cross's death, the mansion fell into disrepair. A fire destroyed part of it, and it was abandoned, eventually becoming a popular destination for hikers, campers, and teenage partiers.
The foundation is still there to this day, though the state has razed the walls down.
So, according to Brandon Morgan, Richard Cross was a devout pagan who built the castle not as a summer home for his wife, but as a place to perform occult rituals and rites.
He claims that while the home was being built, there was a tent city of laborers, but that when local preachers came to provide prayer services, they would all be turned away, leading to the place being called the Devil's Den.
He furthermore claims that on the vernal equinox in 1918, a Polish worker witnessed a human sacrifice being performed on a large pentagram, and that a child once went missing during a Christmas party and was never seen again, and that the strange cursed castle and the dark spells eventually consumed Richard Cross, and he died there just 2 years after it was built.
The problem is, he gives no references and never states where he got this information.
In my own, and albeit I admit it, this is very limited research, but in my own research, I can find absolutely no mention of any of this anywhere. Nothing that states that Richard Cross was a pagan or that he held rituals with a secret society. No mention of a woman being a human sacrifice or of missing children. No mention of the castle ever being called the Devil's Den.
Richard Cross has his own Wikipedia page, and it simply states that he built the castle as a summer home for his wife and children, and that he died in Florida, not New Jersey.
If you Google Clinton Road, you will find all kinds of websites talking about how the road is cursed and haunted, and they all mention Cross Castle. But none of them ever, that I could find at least, ever say anything about Richard Cross being a pagan and holding human sacrifices.
And then there's the Jersey Devil.
This is fun stuff. The Jersey Devil, sometimes called the Leeds Devil, or the 13th child, is a cryptid said to have a body like that of a kangaroo, but with cloven hooves, the head of a goat, horns, a thick forked tail, and large leathery bat wings it uses to swoop and fly with, bopping folks on the head with its tail as it gives a blood-curdling scream.
The creature is said to be the offspring of a woman named Leeds, who, while giving birth to her 13th child, in her pain and delirium exclaimed, "Let the child be the devil!"
Then the healthy infant transformed into a monster, its feet becoming black and fur-covered hooves, its head deforming to take on the shape of a goat, its eyes hideous, a tail slithering down and great black wings sprouting from its back.
Growling and screaming, the devil baby took to the air on its bat wings, swooping down to beat everyone with its tail before flying up the chimney and out into the pines of South Jersey.
The Jersey Devil section of Brandon's podcast, The Devil Within, was one of my absolute favorite parts because he interviews an associate professor of history at Keene University named Brian Regal, who authored the book, The Secret History of the Jersey Devil, How Quakers, Hucksters, and Benjamin Franklin Created a Monster.
In the interview, Professor Regal explains that the monster known today isn't from colonial times, but is a much more modern invention.
While the term Leeds Devil was used in colonial times, It didn't refer to an actual monster, but was instead used to describe those who weren't patriotic before the Revolutionary War, similar to expressions like snowflake or rhino today.
The Leeds were a very prominent family in South Jersey who had a rivalry with Benjamin Franklin, as they both published almanacs. And while smearing the family name, Ben Franklin started calling them devils and monsters, sparking the term Leeds Devil as an insult.
Then, nearly 200 years later, there were strange footprints in the snow and brief sightings of a strange creature in that area. And because of that old political insult, this new creature was deemed the Leeds Devil.
So, sensing a business opportunity, a popular amusement arcade in Philadelphia, the Ninth and Archdime Museum, decides to make a freak show attraction featuring the monster. They get a kangaroo from somewhere, painted green, and attach wings to it, charging a dime to see it.
I fucking love this shit. But they don't think the Leeds Devil has the right ring to it. They need something more enticing. So they come up with the Jersey Devil. And voila, a modern cryptid was born. How cool is that?
Yeah, it's awesome. But you may be asking, what does this have to do with the sad tale of Tommy Sullivan? Well, in spooky New Jersey, everything is interconnected on a supernatural level.
Although the Jersey Devil haunts South Jersey, over 150 miles away from Jefferson Township, the haunted Clinton Road is said to have its own menagerie of creepy creatures, from hounds of hell to half-man, half-deer creatures to albino mutant animals. And according to Brandon, these are all tied up with werewolves, skinwalkers, and even the chupacabra, all of which gather there on that dark, forlorn road where Tommy may or may not have gone to and discovered an active cult of Satanists. My only question is, where is the Wendigo? Come on, man, you gotta have the Wendigo show up to this party.
Originally on a lark, according to Brandon, Tommy and his new friend, Juvenile 1, would sneak out of the house in the middle of the night to go to Cross's castle. There, they'd watch Satanists hold black masses, and eventually they'd hold their own magical ritual there.
What proof do we have that this happened? That Tommy and Juvenile 1 went out to Cross's castle? Well, supposedly, late at night, a car full of people were parked on Clinton Road by the trail that leads to the Cross Castle when they heard an explosion, and a group of people draped in ceremonial garb came running out of the forest with their cloaks on fire.
There is supposedly a police report of this incident, stating that the explosion was caused by, and this is a quote, improper use of objects in satanic worship.
What does that even mean, improper use of objects in satanic worship? If this is a true story, I can guarantee you that I know what happened. They were probably trying to use gasoline to start a bonfire and just dumped too much gasoline on it. Gasoline is highly explosive, and many people have been burned and caught themselves on fire using it to get burn piles and campfires going. You only need a tiny amount of gas, but some folks will dump gallons on, then drop a match in, and whoosh.
So the people in the car claim that they also saw two young boys come stumbling out of the forest, one limping and the other holding him up and helping him walk. The two kids are presumed to be Tommy and his friend, Juvenile 1.
The people in the car were concerned, rightly so, seeing children fleeing an explosion during a black magical ritual. And they went to help them, offer them a ride. But when they pulled up, the children mysteriously disappeared.
Is it true? Who knows? But even if it was, there was no evidence that the boy was Tommy Sullivan.
Now here's how it all supposedly went down, and where it really starts to just go off the rails. Brandon claims that when the supposed pagan Richard Cross died, his occult books were donated to a local library, and in some convoluted way, they made their way into the basement of Pope John High School. You have to admit, this is some good stuff. Ancient books of black magic that find their way into the basement of a Catholic high school.
And even stranger is how Tommy was led down into the dusty, dark basement by a supernatural force that guided him to the cobweb-draped books, hidden for decades, but now found again.
And in these books was a drawing by hand of the castle by Richard Cross, which showed where to perform certain dark rites and rituals, including a Yule ritual to be performed on the winter solstice that would summon a demon from hell.
So Tommy and his friend, Juvenile 1, sneak out of the house on December 22nd, the winter solstice, and venture out into the dark and freezing forests of Clinton Road to the foreboding stone castle. The Satan worshippers are all there, holding a black mass, but as luck would have it, they weren't in the castle itself this time, but off to the side.
So, as the Satanists get on with making a mockery of the Holy Eucharist, Tommy and Juvenile 1 begin the ancient Yule ritual. First lighting candles, then circling the crumbling castle remains, chanting in Latin. When the temperature suddenly plummeted and a violent explosion of wind came ripping up, a literal tornado, blowing out the candles.
Thunder roared, following a blinding light that came upwards from the ground, and a demon rose from the pits of hell and entered into the body of Tommy Sullivan.
From here, the tale Brandon tells seems to spiral into his own dark fantasy realm, as he tells us things he could not possibly know, such as Tommy's dreams and deep inner thoughts as he struggles with this monster inside of him.
He claims Tommy committed the murder blacked out, and that Tommy was actually a hero for not murdering his brother and father as well, though he did set the house on fire while they were sleeping and write that he thought he'd killed them.
But for Brandon, who is an Irish Catholic New Jersey boy just like Tommy, he sees Tommy as a hero who battled a demon in order to let his father and brother live. It's just like the book The Shining, not the movie The Book, where Jack, possessed by the evil of the Overlook Hotel, has Danny pinned in a corner and he's just about to club him to death with a croquet mallet. When he is able to overtake the evil within, and instead of hitting Danny, hits himself, bashing himself in the face over and over, allowing Danny to escape.
Brandon also claims that it was the demon who wrecked the car, not Tommy.
Brandon then claims that Richard Cross's book of black magic and spells that Tommy used to evoke an actual demon was stolen from the house during the ensuing chaos and was sold to a private collector of the occult, though he admits this has never been verified.
And of course, Brandon claims that Tommy Sullivan didn't kill himself, but that it was actually the demon who killed him. That Tommy watched helplessly as the demon controlled his movements, slicing his wrist with the same Boy Scout knife that he'd used to mutilate his mother, then slamming it into his neck and pulling it across his throat, severing the muscles, tendons, windpipe, and arteries, till only the spine remained and his head lolled off to the side like a broken doll.
It's the only thing that makes sense. A 14-year-old isn't capable of doing such a thing. Doesn't even have the physical strength to commit the act. Therefore, he had to be possessed by a demon.
It is wild. I'm struggling to wrap my head around how he did that to himself in that extreme. That's crazy. Anyhow, After Tommy's throat had been gashed and his lifeblood poured out into the snow, in Brandon's own words, quote,
"A demon was born into the world, delivered, as promised, through a breach in the mortal conduit that summoned it into our plane of existence, struggling up through the mutilated gore that used to be the body of Tommy Sullivan, until it could finally climb out from the gasping hole that it created in Tommy's neck. Then it launched into the air and lit on the high branch of a walnut tree, where it would at last become fully realized. Standing at full height on its powerful legs, with cloven hooves, its tail unfurled, it spread its leathery wings, and screeching to announce its presence, launched itself into the January night and flew away." And you gotta give it to him. He's a great writer.
Yeah. Chapter 4. More tragedy, weirdness, and conclusions.
Jesus was born in a barn. Out in the snow, his mother held him in her arms. Then one day they decide that Jesus Christ had to die. You're gonna die too. You're gonna die too. In nebulous stars are formed. They're suns to us to keep us warm. Although our only source of light will one day burn out the night. You're gonna die too. You're gonna die too.
After the murder of his wife and suicide of his son, Thomas Sr. moved to Florida and remarried. But tragedy sadly followed him. 10 years after the incident, his surviving son, Brian, took his own life as well.
So sad. A new family moved into the house on White Rock Boulevard, and again tragedy would strike. The family's daughter returned home from college, went down into that forlorn basement where Tommy murdered and mutilated his mother, and she took her own life.
And of course, all of this has been attributed to the work of demons and devils as well. And I have to admit, it is all incredibly strange.
And so Satanic Panic gripped the land, culminating in Geraldo Rivera's infamous television special, Exposing Satan's Underground, which of course featured Tommy Sullivan.
Before a studio audience, Geraldo asked Detective Sergeant Pearl Hart, who'd investigated the case, if Tommy was possessed. Sergeant Hart simply and wisely replies that possession is a state of mind, and that it was a brutal and terrible crime.
Geraldo then turns to a Catholic priest and asks him if it's possible for a person to be possessed by the devil. And the priest says,
"It certainly is."
Then Geraldo turns to none other than Ozzy Osbourne, beaming in from London on a satellite, and asks him why these Satan-loving kids who commit crimes all listen to heavy metal music. And Ozzy says,
Well, I don't really know. All I do is make music, I don't sit down and purposely plan to freak everyone out. Not all my songs are about Satan.
But Geraldo then cuts him off to talk to a guy who killed a convenience store clerk during a robbery, but now blames it all on the devil.
Eventually, after an incredibly amusing interview with Charlie Manson telling him, Satan means whatever I'm looking at, whatever I want it to mean. It's me if I can get up on that highway. It's everything human beings don't understand. It's all their fears. It's what they're not sure of. You dig what I'm saying? Satan to me would be God. Geraldo settles on the most shocking part of the infamous television show, the ritualistic abuse of children, almost all of which has been disproven and debunked. And this is crazy. I'm actually friends with one of the children who was interviewed on that show. He was a very, very young kid. And explaining it today, he says he was just a very imaginative child whose parents were splitting up, and he was guided and led to say his father was the head of a devil-worshipping cult who had abused him ritualistically, although none of it was true.
Then Geraldo comes to the infamous McMartin preschool case, the case that finally broke the Satanic Panic fever dream gripping the country.
McMartin was a family-run preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, where the owners were accused of molesting 360 different children during ritualistic abuse and devil worship.
The children claimed they were taken through secret tunnels in the basement of the school, to hot air balloons guided by Chuck Norris, as well as witches flying on brooms. They would then be forced to participate in satanic orgies held in car washes and airports. Afterwards, the children would be flushed down the toilet to emerge fresh and clean, ready to go home with their parents.
Investigators actually raised the site, searching for these secret tunnels and underground chambers, finding nothing.
The trials lasted 7 years, destroying the lives of the staff, and were some of the most expensive trials in American history. Eventually, all charges were dropped, but the damage had been done.
And it would be revealed that the main accuser, a child who stated the defendants could fly, among other things, was known to be suffering from mental illness, and that this fact was withheld from the defense.
The audacity of these accusations, as well as the sheer lack of proof that destroyed the lives of these people, looked to spell the end of the Satanic Panic. People began to see how ridiculous it all was, and how it was used as an excuse by many to destroy innocent lives.
Are there devil-worshipping killers? Yeah, of course there is. We've covered lots of them. But there are no lack of Christian killers as well, many of whom we've also covered, such as serial killer Herbert Mullen, who was a devout Catholic, and recently John Mills and his Pentecostal cult of the unknown tongues.
And we can't fail to mention that one of the largest murder-suicides in history, over 900 people, was orchestrated by Christian preacher Jim Jones.
So, in my opinion, it wasn't the devil to blame. It appears obvious to me that it is delusions brought on by severe mental illness that is to blame, and that most likely Tommy was showing early signs of schizophrenia, which usually begins to manifest itself in the teens and early 20s.
Tommy Sullivan was an altar boy and a Boy Scout, and these two things are often used to paint a picture of him as being wholesome and all-American. But the dark truth is that both these organizations, the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts of America, are riddled with sex abuse scandals.
Could Tommy have even been the victim of abuse in either of these institutions? And could that have sparked a mental breakdown? We don't know. It's just a shot in the dark. But it makes more sense than the devil to me. Could he have suffered head trauma during wrestling? Again, we really don't know.
We know this, as evident in his strange writings. Tommy was suffering from bizarre delusions and possibly even hallucinations, symptoms of a serious mental illness, possibly even the onslaught of schizophrenia. He became obsessed with the idea of demons and devils, something his Catholic faith does not deny, and he became surly and argumentative. At a wrestling match, he used an illegal hold and seriously hurt the other competitor, getting himself suspended from school sports.
On January 9th, 1988, Tommy Sullivan got into an argument with his mother over his growing fascination with heavy metal music and Satanism. And when his mother went to the basement with a load of clothes to wash, Tommy followed her. When she had her back turned to him, he struck her from behind with a 25-pound dumbbell, shattering her skull. When she fell to the ground, he attacked her with his Boy Scout knife, stabbing her 36 times, slashing her throat, and carving her eyes out.
Then, in an attempt to kill the rest of his family, Tommy gathered all of his books on the occult, arranged them in a circle on the living room floor, and started a fire out of crumpled newspaper in the middle of them, thinking this would cause the house to burn to the ground with his sleeping father and brother in it.
He was so sure of this fact that he wrote, "I have already killed my family," in a bizarre letter to the most powerful demon in hell, a letter which to me highlights mental illness and delusion.
He then attempted to flee in his father's car, but the roads were icy and snow-covered, and he crashed into a snowbank, exited the car, and ran to the neighbor's backyard, sitting by their woodpile, where he could watch the chaos unfold.
He most likely was waiting to see the house go up in a ball of flames, and must have been surprised to see his father come racing out, seeking help.
He peered through the darkness and watched as pandemonium erupted, police, firemen, the Kennedy brothers all racing in and out, then his own little brother being taken away.
So Tommy's plan was a failure. He had not killed his entire family, and as the gravity of his situation settled on him, he found himself hopeless, filled with a simmering rage. He took his Boy Scout knife, and with all his might jammed it into his wrist, where it slid between his radius and his ulna bones, and he then drug it upward with a sawing motion, slicing the tendons and muscles, but missing the radial arteries, which are located on the far side of the arm, not in the middle.
Still alive, though gravely wounded and in unimaginable pain, he plunged the knife into his neck, all the way to the hilt, then hacked across through his windpipe, carotid arteries, nearly severing his head from his body.
His heart rate increased as his body then began to compensate for the blood loss, and the lack of blood to his brain caused him to fall unconscious. And as he lay there in the snow, he quickly bled out. So much blood as to create a 10-foot circle in the snow, and he was dead within minutes.
How could a 14-year-old boy be capable of such a gruesome suicide? How could he have the strength to perform such a feat?
Though he was young, Tommy was a star athlete. He lifted weights. He ran 5 miles every morning. He was incredibly strong, able to literally destroy another boy's elbow while wrestling. And wrestling teaches athletes to ignore pain and find inner strength, to become a fierce warrior, to dominate, to literally release the beast. That, combined with the massive amounts of adrenaline that must have been flowing through him, coupled with severe mental illness, bizarre delusions, gave Thomas Sullivan Jr. the strength and will to commit these horrific acts on himself. But that is just my personal opinion. Maybe he was possessed by the devil. I've been wrong before.
And on that note, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Thomas Sullivan Jr. and the Satanic Panic. We hope you've enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. You want to say hi? You got a case you think we should cover? Did we get something wrong? Was Richard Cross a pagan with bell books? Let us know at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. We will see you next week. Goodbye for now. Watch out for the devil.